So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the NHS. So this was a viewer, a subscriber requested video. So if you want to request any videos, you can put the articles in the comments of the YouTube section, or you're better off putting it in the Discord. So in my Discord server, so that way I have a record of it and stuff like that, and it's just way easier to discuss it. So we've got a load of kind of things to talk about with regards to the NHS, pros, cons, and kind of my overall thoughts. But I am going to add a disclaimer at the start, which should be fairly obvious, which is that the NHS is not safe, not just with Johnson and Gove, but with Conservative governments in general. Labour governments traditionally fund the NHS far more generously. So if we actually look at some data, we can see that yes, the NHS budget has gone up, but the issue is that Labour fund the NHS far more generously than the Conservative government have. So if you look here, the Blair and Brown governments, these were Labour governments here, between 96 and 2010, the budget was, the average annual increase, real growth rate, this is, taking inflation and all that stuff into account, is 6%. Right, even under Thatcher and Major, the growth rate was 3.9%, but under the coalition government, which is 2010 to 2015, it's at 1%, and under the Conservative government right now, it's at 1.6%. So you can see here that the Labour government here, was almost six times more when it comes to actual budget allocation. Actual funding of the NHS was far more generous than the Conservative government. Statistics and stuff are not my strong suit, and there are really confusing stuff out there about when it comes to budgets and all that stuff. But I just want to make a further point, which is that the NHS budget is actually going to be cut by the Conservative government, by Rishi Rishi, as I like to call him. That's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the money man, Rishi Sunak, which is, if you actually look here, so when they talk about the budget, for the Department of Health and Social Care, you can actually see that it's 149 billion pounds in the year 2021. But if you actually look at how much is allocated, it's 147 billion pounds. So it is slightly less because that money goes elsewhere. So this isn't actually a definitive answer to when the Conservatives say the Department of Health and Social Care's budget has gone up, because we can actually look at the numbers here, and this is not the final amount the NHS actually receives. And if we actually look at the actual increases, budget increases and things like that, it's far more generous under a Labour government, and even a Labour government gives more as a percentage of GDP to the NHS. So, just to make a long story short here, one of the key reasons the NHS is having problems is because of the Conservative government, of these last, Conservative governments. The Tories in general, to be fair. If you look at the Department for budgeting for health, the money allocated has gone up, but the NHS is facing severe financial pressure, with trusts across the country spending more than they should be bringing in. So the NHS is having problems financially, budgeting. The NHS was also asked several years ago to find £22 billion in savings by 2020 in order to keep up with the rising demand and an ageing population. So the government have said, we're going to increase your funding, but you need to find budget cuts as well. So that impacts, things like health outcomes. It's not very hard to figure this out. Rishi in his last budget, which was, a few days ago, there's no money for the NHS. That's what Annalise Dodds points out. This is what the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, points out. So, it's not a big surprise. That's happening. NHS needs extra money. This is from 2019. And a quick point on statistics here. It's very confusing when you've got this from NHS England, which is something we'll be talking about in this video. Which is how the budget is increasing in England. So you can see here, this is real terms. It takes into account inflation. On 2015-16 budget, it's gone up, but for some reason in this one from the Health Select Committee, this looks at total health spending in terms at 2015-16 prices. So you can see here the budget hasn't really gone up. So it's very confusing when you have so many conflicting statistics. So I think the best way to actually judge it is to look at, who is spending more and where is that money going. And what we can see is that under a Labour government, the NHS was far more generous. The government was far more generous when it comes to funding. And we'll be talking about that further into the video. So I just want to make these points clear. I'm going to add a disclaimer somewhere on the screen to actually talk about all of this stuff. which mentions that the biggest problem the NHS has is the Conservative government. Just so people can't take this out of context, because that's the last thing I want. So what are the pros of the NHS? So it's a single payer system, which means that sorry, it's not a single payer system. I made that mistake last time. It is a universal healthcare system, which isn't single payer because there are private healthcare companies within the UK. So it's a universal care system. So there's no profit motive. So like we mentioned, the NHS does have to balance the budget. It can't just run infinitely. It's the budget that the government has allocated it. But it doesn't need to make a profit. So what that means is there's no, it doesn't need to make, a 20% profit. So it doesn't have to, it can spend up to that kind of, it can spend pretty much as much comes in, if that makes sense. So it doesn't need to, receive, say, £1 million and then make a 20% profit, that sort of thing. It doesn't need to do that. It can run into, spending however much it makes in that year, as long as the government hasn't asked it to make savings. So hopefully that made sense. Not the best start. So the NHS is funded by taxes from the entire country. So if you work and you earn over a certain amount, it's a pretty low amount. It's funded by taxes. So if we actually look here, it's funded. Some of the money comes from national insurance, which is a tax in itself, which is typically you pay, even if you make, I think it's like 10 grand or something like that, you still pay a bit of national insurance each month, and it's like flex, so it depends on how much you make in that pay month, right? And you got general taxation as well. So this is up to 2010, but it gives you the picture of how it's actually funded, and obviously the ratios differ depending on the year. So you can see that was due, the tax rate went down due to an increase in national insurance contributions. So if you want to learn more about national insurance contributions, you can always Google that. But that's how the NHS is funding through taxation. So it's not funded. Well, there are other costs as well. You do have to pay prescriptions, but that's a different topic that we'll get to in a few minutes. But what you can see there is paid through taxes. So, there are... I'm doing my best not to compare it to the US system or other systems, but when you pay for health insurance, that in itself is a kind of tax. It's optional, but if you want to roll the dice and not have health insurance, then good luck, brother, because that is not a system you want to be living in. But I'm going to do my best to try and keep comparisons out. So that answers that question. A centralised system. So what that means, the NHS is run by the government, specifically the Department of Health and Social Care, and NHS England, and NHS. See, in reality, having a top-down system is fine as long as everything makes sense. But because of David Cameron, our former Prime Minister from between 2010 and 2016, he created something called Public Health England, which was again, I was really young when this happened, so I wasn't 100% sure about it. But Boris Johnson is scrapping this. That's how bad it is. And if we actually look at some analysis from Hugh Pym, who actually does good work, one of the few people at the BBC I can actually say does good work, saying that a Conservative government headed by Boris Johnson is about to start reversing health reform in England, introduced by David Cameron, which is within about the same decade, really. So the Health and Social Care Act was highly controversial. The left hated it because of the introduction of competitive tendering, which was seen as a vehicle for private companies to undermine the NHS, because what that means is private companies can bid for contracts, and they can get these contracts and it's for profit. So inherently it is less effective. People can make the argument that private companies are far more efficient and things like that, but it's the way you make these efficiencies that could lead to a lack of quality of care. Also, it did open up the NHS from lawsuits from people like the guy who runs Virgin, Richard Branson. So there's that. Many Conservative politicians came to dislike it because of the bureaucratic costs and confused lines of accountability. So in a traditional top-down system, it'd be very clear who is to blame. But in this system with Public Health England, it's not great. But in a traditional top-down system before David Cameron made these changes, it was a lot more clear and obviously a lot more simple of who was in charge and what was going on when it comes to the government departments and the NHS, etc. So this change the government made in 2012 was a very stupid change. So that comes into one of the cons, but we'll talk about that when we get there. So a centralized system can work as long as you don't have idiots in charge, which really is the theme of this video, to be honest. system like, a universal healthcare system, any government run system has to have, or so any system should, if it doesn't have the right people in charge, it's going to struggle and it's going to fail ultimately, unless you have massive amounts of funding, like legit, like excess amounts of funding. So like the Pentagon or something like that, when it comes to fly F-15s or whatever it is they spent billions on, which didn't work. So, we go on to the next point, which is any UK resident or citizen can get help. With a GP, you need to be registered. So basically, because I'm a British citizen, I can go to the doctors, to the hospital. It's not going to cost me anything apart from a prescription price. Which is something we'll talk about as well. There's so many caveats I have to add to everything. But say if you're pregnant, or you get into a car accident, you can call an ambulance. It's not going to cost you anything. You can go to the hospital. They'll sort you out. It's not going to cost you anything apart from parking. If people come to see you or whatever. But the point remains is that you can get help regardless. It's not going to cost you out of pocket. That's one of the reasons why we have a tax system. So you will get help. So long as you're a British resident or citizen. For people here illegally, they will still help you, but you will get charged. So that's depends what you believe in with that one. I don't think that's a good system. I think that causes more problems because the NHS can really work effectively when they are preemptive. So you get a scan early on, they see what's wrong with you really early on, and you can get things dealt with. But if you leave things too long, things get worse. Think about tumours and things like that. The longer you leave it, the worse it becomes. You catch it early on, and you can get it removed, etc., without having to go through excess amounts of chemotherapy. And that's what the NHS is meant to be really good at, which is preemptive care. So any UK citizen or resident, so if you're here legally, you can get help. It's not an issue. I believe for some people you have to have health insurance, but you can get that on your way in when you get your visa or whatever, or you can buy health insurance whilst you're here, and then the NHS will look after you that way. So I think it's a good system. Not helping illegal people here, people illegally can cause more problems. But I think I've covered that point. So they won't ask for insurance or payment. So free at the point of service. No co-pays or charges or ambulance fees, only for prescriptions. So like we just talked about a minute ago, you're not going to have to really pay out of pocket, and that's a really great thing, especially since a lot of people in this country don't have a lot of money in savings, not just due to the pandemic, but things like low wages, etc. Working hours, not job availability. There are no out of pocket expenses that are ridiculously high. So that's also a massive pro of the NHS. One of the biggest pros of the NHS, I'd say. These two here combined to be some of the best pros here, I'd argue. So medicines are free or subsidised depending on where you live. So if we jump back to the old Google, we go here. So the standard cost of prescription in England. So it was free under Labour, and it was the Conservative Party that put in charges, I believe. But if you earn under a certain amount, you can get prescriptions for free. But it's £9.15 per item. So if you're on multiple kinds of medication, that can get very expensive. But because it's subsidised, it's a lot cheaper than it would have been if you're paying, sort of out of pocket, if that makes sense. Or this is out of pocket, but if you're paying, the full price, I've seen how much insulin costs in other countries, and I'm just like, lordy, So, pharmacies are run generally by private companies like Lloyd's and Boots, etc. There's a massive profit motive there, so that's an issue. So what we can see from this is that, yes, you do have to pay for prescriptions, but it is subsidised, which is a pro. However, the system was better before. Also, in Scotland, which has a different, it's hard to explain the system in the UK, but Scotland has its own kind of government, but it's kind of still ruled by Westminster government, the London government. So it does have some, freedoms. They do have some things they have control over. And so in Scotland, you don't pay, for NHS prescriptions. If you present a Scottish prescription at a pharmacy in Scotland, you don't have to pay. Present an English prescription with a valid entitlement card at a pharmacy in Scotland, I'm assuming that'll say you don't have to pay. But basically, if you're Scottish and you live within Scotland and you have, a prescription from, I'd assume, a Scottish doctor, you don't have to pay for a prescription. So that's a government choice right there. And that is something we'll be talking about down the line. So, it's important to note that, yes, it is subsidised, but no, it isn't perfect, which kind of sums up the NHS in some ways. Yes, it's great. No, it isn't perfect, and there are a lot of things to change. So economies to scale of medicine. So the NHS, because it's such a large health organization, and because it's a single kind of unit, what that means is when it comes to buying medicines. From pharmaceutical companies, because it can buy so much of it at once, it gets something called economies to scale, which means that it can get a massive discount. Because if you got to think, you're paying, you're not buying 100, 200 vials of medicine, whatever kind of medicine you're buying hundreds of thousands potentially, so you can get it way cheaper. There are issues with some of the medicines the NHS buys, like the what's called paracetamol. They buy are way more expensive than the paracetamol you can get in the shops for some reason. I don't know why. But generally, economies to scale. When it comes to big purchases, when it comes to someone purchasing a vast amount of product, you get a discount. Typically, that's why you go to wholesalers. You can buy medicines wholesale rather than buying a few at a time if you're like a small pharmacy, if that makes sense. So you have access to vast amounts of medicines regardless of cost. So the NHS does give you a vast amount of access to medicines. However, there are issues with certain rare ones. I don't have any examples to hand, but I have read about cases where certain people can't get the medicines that they require or the treatments they require because it's not cost effective, or because they buy such small quantities it's not worth it, because these are typically for rare illnesses. Something I disagree with. I think the NHS should cover everyone, but under things like budget constraints, I can understand why they don't do this. So it's a tough one. But I put my blame somewhere else, but it's up to you who you want to blame. So referrals from GP. So to go to the hospital, typically you would get a referral from a GP. So you'd go to your doctors and say, "Hey doc, I got a pain in my elbow," and they would look at you and stuff, and they say, "Look, you need to go for scans." So they would refer you to the hospital. So that's a far more effective way of giving out hospital appointments, rather than people turning up and saying to A&E or something like that, "I've got a pain in my elbow." There are issues with GPs, which is something that we'll be talking about towards the next bit of the video, the cons bit of the video. So care is rationed by need, not money. So what that means is, if you're in desperate need for help, it's not about how much money you pay to the NHS via national insurance and taxes. It's done by your need. So, for example, if you're a person who's got a fever and you need hospital treatment, you're not going to jump over the queue of someone who's got a broken leg or has just been in a car accident, just because you pay more money to the NHS. What that means is that it's done by need. So the people who need more help typically get more help, regardless of how much money they pay into the system, because that's not factored in. No one's like, I earn 100k, I pay this amount of national insurance and tax. Put me ahead of the queue of this guy who's unemployed or has a low-paying job or whatever. That doesn't happen. These people who are rich have the option to go private. That's up to them. But because you still pay tax and national insurance, there's no way to opt out of it. Care is rationed by need, which you can see it as a pro or a con. That's up to you. That's your philosophy. But the main pros of the NHS are that any UK resident or citizen could get help. They won't ask for insurance or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about, I think it was Lady Gaga's dog walker who got shot, and Lady Gaga's forked out 80 grand to, pay for her dog walker's medical bills. Like, what? I know I said I wouldn't try to compare with the American system, but come on. You have to compare to something, right? And their system's way different to the system in the UK. So I hope that's covered all the pros. The main point is they're going to look after you the best they can, and people that have caught COVID, they don't have to worry about hospital bills, etc., because that's not the system we live under. So I hope that's covered all the pros. Just want to have a quick look how long this video has been running, and we're going for a long time, so this is going to be a long one. So have fun watching this one, guys. So con. So Public Health England is a con. We've spoken about that a few minutes ago because of its bureaucracy, etc. It's a massive problem. Also, the fact that it's very hard to get data pre-2010 because all the data is given out by Public Health England. So it's very hard to actually analyse how good the NHS is prior to 2010. I found that very difficult to do for this video. So if you have the information there at hand, chuck it in the comments below, or throw it in the Discord, and if I do a follow-up video I'll cover that, because it was very frustrating. This is some of the best data I could come out with, which is frustrating for anyone watching. I get that. So if we keep moving on to the next point, which is centralized system, so budget cuts and privatization. So because it's a centralized system, the government decides its budget, and the government has decided they want to do budget cuts on the NHS. We've spoken about them having to find, it was originally 30 billion of savings, pounds of savings, but then the NHS said we can't do that. The most, I think, so the government is one of the two said, fine, do 22 billion and we'll give you the 8 billion, like that. And so by doing that, what that means is it does impact care massively, to the point where the NHS has openly admitted that, look, without the right funding, we're going to struggle here. They told Theresa May that, they told David Cameron that, and they told Bojo the Wonder Clown that. So I'll leave all the stuff in the links in the description, so you can read the stuff for yourself if you want to. For whatever reason, if you want to just do further reading or you don't believe me, it's up to you. So because it's tax-based, so increasing this may be unpopular. So increasing taxes generally isn't the most popular thing. I think people wouldn't mind paying more towards the NHS, but it depends on where you pay these taxes to. So, if the government says we're going to do a tax increase, everyone's going to be like, oh, come on, man. But if you say we're going to do a tax increase and we're going to give all this money to the NHS, from some of the polls I've seen before, I think people would be more okay with that. So because it's tax-based, it can be quite unpopular to actually... to actually increase the budget like that. You can try. You might not be the most popular person in the world if you say we're going to do a tax increase for the NHS. That just, I think you'd be right if you said that and you actually did it. But that's just a general point. GPs. So we spoke about the good about GPs, so we're going to speak about the bad, and it's very bad in a lot of different ways. So you need to be registered. So you can only be registered, as far as I know, with one GP. So you're kind of stuck. So we'll talk about GPs more. We'll talk about this more actually. So GPs, the funding for GPs is weird, right? So if I find the article, so the way GPs' general practices are contracted and funded is complex and very different from other parts of the NHS. So this explainer sets out, how it's done. So GPs are small to medium-sized businesses whose services are contracted by the NHS commissions to provide generalist medical services in a geographic or population area. While some GPs are operated by an individual GP, most general practices in England are run by a GP partnership. This involves 2 or more GPs, sometimes with nurses, practice managers and others, as long as at least one partner is a GP, working together as business partners. So GPs is more of a business. It feels more like a private system, in all honesty. And so what that means is that it's for profit. Basically, it's for profit. And if there's an article here which actually, so in this article they talk about how a GP's practice, or a GP partnership, has been brought out by a US health insurance firm, and so it does talk about how much profit this company made. So this company, that runs a load of GPs surgeries, made £35 million in profits over the last 5 years. And so this is one of the problems with a GPs, because it's for profit. It does create problems when it comes to the lack of service and care. So one GP could run it as one general practitioner, then you have a load of other nurses and stuff, and because it's private, they can close if they're not given the right money, or if the doctors retire. So I've had that happen to me recently, where the area I live in, the GP I used to go with has closed down. I didn't even like them, to be fair, but then we got moved on to a different one. And the issue with that is because I live in not densely but a populated area, a lot of other people have gone to this other GP that I am now with, and so what that does is create a massive strain on that GP services because of all the extra people. And so because of the fact that it's a weird kind of for profit kind of almost private system, it's not great. And so that's one of the problems with GPs. And because it's run for profit, what they do is just make the services rubbish. So they hire more people like pharmacists and things like that to help you when you really want to see a GP to actually get yourself checked out. This has always been the system by the looks of things, even under Labour. I don't know why they didn't try and change it. I guess because there are so many more GPs than things like hospitals. It can be quite difficult and bureaucratic in some ways, but I think GPs need a massive reform, and that's one of the key problems within the NHS. So wait times for GPs are very high, and one of the reasons is because of this kind of weird private system we have for GPs. So let's see if I can find that one. So with GPs, 51% of people can get a same day appointment, which is fine. He's talking about half of people can get a same day appointment, but you got people waiting, 1 day, 7%, 2 to 7 days. That's very broad. They should not have asked it like this. That's a very broad amount of days here. 17% of people waiting, 2 to 7 days, about a week, up to a week. 8 to 14 days, 11% of people. 15 to 21 days, 7% of people. Almost 22 days to 28 days, a month, 5% of people. And 3% of people waiting 28 plus days. And the thing is, right, when it comes to this sort of stuff, you either get better within that time frame of 2 to 7 days, or you end up in the hospital. Like, there's no real two ways about it. If you have an illness where you have to go to the doctor, it's going to get progressively worse, or you heal up from it, unless you've got something like a sprained ankle, which is something you can figure out for yourself. But the problem that creates is it puts strain on other services, like A&E, and without like I said, the NHS works best when it's preemptive. If you go to the GPs and you have a problem, you can get things sorted very quickly. Another problem is that it's very difficult to get a second opinion within the NHS and doctors, because I don't know if it's just because of the strained systems, or if medical professionals, like GPs and nurses within GP practice are like this, but they're very dismissive of any issues you have. That's not just a personal anecdote. I've noticed that from other people as well. They're like, oh, this isn't a big issue, or you just need to lose weight, or these sorts of things, where they don't really listen to people properly to actually figure out the problems. I read one story. Again, some of this stuff is anecdotal, but it's important, where she had a tumor, but the healthcare worker said, "No, you're fine. Don't worry about it." And not about the tumor, but her health condition. And she said she had really bad swelling on her legs when she went the second time because she wasn't feeling well. And the GP, the medical professional was like, "Why didn't you tell me that?" And he was like, "That's something you're meant to ask me. Like, if I have swelling and things like that, because that suddenly flared up again recently, and so that person had to get private care within Germany." So if GPs and medical professionals actually took more time, and I don't know if that's just because of budget reasons, or is it just the way they've become trained to be. I don't know that, but there are issues with getting things like a second opinion. Wait times for GPs and hospitals, A&E is pretty bad. So we've talked about GPs, and the way for some reason to get an appointment is you need to call in at 8 a.m. to there's a massive scramble to get doctor's appointments at 8 a.m. and that's one of the reasons why the wait times, you can get an appointment within a day, because you got to win the scramble really. Or that's one of the reasons why you have to wait so many days, because you have to call in at 8 a.m. It doesn't make sense. Like, the system we have for GPs just really doesn't make sense. There's an article on A&E times. I had that article all along. So, ambulance. This is about ambulances. Then we'll talk about A&E times. So ambulance crews responding to 999 calls in England took more than 30 minutes to reach patients needing urgent care, a total of 905,000 times. So ambulance crews responding to 999 calls in England took more than 30 minutes to reach patients needing urgent care, a total of 905,086 times. I hope that's how you say that number. During the 2019-2020, of those, 253,277 had to wait at least an hour, and 35,960, the equivalent of almost 100 patients a day, waited for more than 2 hours. So you can see here there's massive problems with ambulances actually getting to people. In addition to heart attacks and strokes, the figures cover patients who had sustained a serious injury, trauma, or major burns, who had developed potentially lethal bloodborne infectious infection, sepsis. So under NHS guidelines, ambulances are meant to arrive to incidents involving a medical emergency known as Category 2 calls within 18 minutes. And so what you can see from this, there are major problems when it comes to ambulances reaching people within their targeted times. So if we find the article... So if we look at this article here, we can actually see that, A&E target. So these are, they have to see, within A&E, their target is to see people within 4 hours of them getting to A&E. And again, it doesn't go back beyond 2010, and I don't know if that's by design, so we can't compare it to how it was under the Labour government as easily, or Is it just the way it was set up because NHS England was set up in 2012? But then why does it have the 2011 numbers? You see what I'm saying? So you can see here, they missed one of their targets in 2011. So they missed loads in 2013, and it just gets progressively worse. This is pre-pandemic, by the way. 2015 managed to hit one by the looks of things, and since then, it's managed to miss all of them. You've got about 80% of people. So you got about 10% of people waiting more than 4 hours to get treatment within A&E, and that 4 hour window is huge if you need help. And one of the reasons is because of the underfunding, and another reason is because care is rationed by need, not money. So what that means is if say you're about to be seen by someone, but then there's a massive emergency, someone's got burns or some sort of major infection or something like that, they'll get treatment ahead of you. Because of the way the system is. I'm not saying it's a bad system. I'm saying that's the way it is. And so that is probably one of the reasons why wait times are so long within A&E, but it is mainly due to the underfunding, and that's what I want people to realise. So we've talked about that, the wait times, how it's an issue, referrals to hospital from a GP. So another issue is that some people jump to A&E because their child's sick or they're sick and they can't see a GP. That's another issue. But referrals to hospitals from GP. So the thing you've got to remember is to get yourself checked out so that the hospital knows what kind of things to look at. You need to go to a GP first. And if you cannot go to a GP, it's very hard to get a referral to the hospital. So because of the system with GPs, it bottlenecks everything else, if that makes sense. And people, I've seen some analysis where they say, A&E numbers really highlight the strain on the NHS is one way of looking at it, because the more people in A&E, it generally means it's not just down to just accidents and emergencies, but it's people who need help, who, they haven't been able to get a GP appointment, etc. Or situations happened where, things have progressively gotten worse. They can't see a GP and they think, I need to go to the hospital. So because of the fact that you need a referral a referral from the GP, typically what that does, it bottlenecks the entire system. So because you can't get a referral from a GP, it means you wait longer to go to the GP or whatever. I hope I'm making sense. I really do, because I am kind of struggling a bit here. This video is a really long video. So, you need a referral to go to hospital generally from a GP. But what happens when you cannot go to a GP because of the 8 a.m. GP scramble? It creates, creates more problems within the patient, the person who needs to go to the hospital, and within, the hospital, because if you could have got a problem sorted quicker earlier on, which wouldn't have been as bad, it does help. I'm just going to get a quick drink. So I hope that makes sense. So paying for medicine, so like I said, it's subsidised, yes, it's free in Scotland under those circumstances, but £9.50 per prescription, per medication, is very expensive if you need 2 or 3 types of medication. You talk about 30 quid a month, or until your prescription runs out. That is very expensive for certain people, and so if people can't afford the medicines that they need, what happens then? They're going to get more progressively sick, and they're going to need more help. So it's a very dumb way to do things. The operation, so it's very stupid. The NHS is the biggest employer in England and also in Europe, if I can find it. Here it is. So the NHS is the biggest employer in Europe and the world's largest employer of highly skilled professionals at 1.3 million people across the health services in England. A health service in England are devoting their working lives to caring for others. So the NHS is a huge operation. So what that means is it can create some sort of bureaucratic issues. They have, the pandemic's actually helped them in some ways clamp down on some of these issues and actually work together a bit more. But, because of this, it can, there's not a lot of fat in the system to trim, but it does create some bureaucratic issues. And obviously, in order to give a pay rise to the to NHS workers, it will cost a lot because of the amount of people within the NHS. And, so it's a bit of a con in that respect, but at the same time, it's not that much different to having loads of small kind of hospitals, private hospitals, and stuff like that, employing loads of people. if that makes sense. I'm losing my mind a bit here, but it's a big operation. That's the point. It's a big operation. Staff shortages due to top-down system and lack of beds, and government xenophobia. So because it's a top-down system, it means that the government are in charge of not really hiring budgets, and what that means is hospitals can't, if they don't have the budget they need, they can't hire the amount of people they need, so they can't invest in staff or facilities. And that's the thing we've seen. Every winter we see that there are a lack of beds, and what that means is that it creates like a domino effect, really, because there are not enough beds. So what that means is people in ambulances are stuck within the ambulances, because they can't leave them out in the street. They can't leave them out in the street. So what that means is the ambulances are stuck there until the beds are freed up. And once the beds are freed up, the ambulance is free to go on to help other people. So that's an issue right there. Another one is government xenophobia. So we've seen massive staff shortages within the NHS for different reasons. So here, we try our best. I've cited this article a lot. This is 2019. So this is about a specific nurse here, Georgina Day. She works in an A&E in London. Her team of just over 20 starts 4 nurses short because there are positions they can't fill, and so that could be down to a lack of budget, but it also could be down to a lack of available nurses. What's it called? Skill, people with the actual skill, the degree and the expertise to be a nurse. But the government also made that problem worse by cutting the nurses bursary, which is like a fund that's meant to help nurses get through university, which is a separate conversation. But what we can see is there is a massive problem here, and because of the low amount that nurses are paid, it's a very difficult thing to hire for. Work 12-hour shifts, work over the holidays, get paid a pittance. That's a great sell. Lol. But, you can see that this is a huge issue. We can also see that more than 10,000 EU nationals have left the NHS since Brexit, the Brexit referendum, including 5,000 nurses. These new figures will add fuel to the concerns about wider staffing crisis. And so what that means is because the government are in charge of certain things, they can make it a hostile environment for, minorities. And so these people will leave. And, it's not just the standard stereotypes of what Eastern European Romanians and Bulgarians, the ones that normally get singled out, do. Some of these people are healthcare workers, and they've left. Some of these people have left because they don't feel welcome, and that's done by the government. This is a side effect of kind of all the xenophobia and racism that they push. We can also see that there are massive shortage with staff, and so what that means is people can't get the care they need. So some of it's due to a lack of money, some of it's due to a lack of support for nursing students, and some of this is due to them leaving maybe for money, financial reasons, because they've got a better deal in a foreign country or in the private sector, or it's because they don't feel welcome in this country. Take your pick there. But there are problems with the government running the healthcare system because of who the government are, really. That's the main issue there. Like I've said before, the problem isn't always the system, it's who's in charge of the system. So, staff salaries are decided by the government, and they've decided not to increase them. This is another con for NHS workers specifically. And if we actually look where is it gone? If we actually look here, we can see that nurses' salaries. These are band five. So these are for newly employed nurses who have just graduated or gotten through basic training. And so you can actually see that in just 2010 there, because of the below inflation increases that nurses have received, and not just nurses, it's more broadly NHS staff. You can see that in real terms they actually had a cut. From 2010 all the way to 2020, which is about leveled out. So their pay in 2020 is still lower than it was in 2010. So that's also a huge con, because the government have decided they don't want to increase the salaries for nurses. And when you have staff that are as burnt out as the NHS staff are now, a lot of them might leave. They might leave the profession completely, or they might leave to go to other countries because they don't feel valued here. And I don't blame them, to be honest. They want a 12.5% pay rise. I don't know how realistic that is, but the government have offered a 1% pay rise. So, it shows you how much the government actually value the NHS. So that's a band 5 nurse. Typically, it's a beginner. There's also one more con. There's a few more here to go, sorry. So care is rationed by need, not money. So again, I've made that point before, but if you're a person who contributes more, you will, it's not like private insurance where because you pay more, you're in, say, a silver band tier. So you get priority treatment over someone who may need the help more, but pays less than you. So, that's a con depending on your philosophy and what you look at and how much help you actually need. So it depends on what you believe in. Uni fees for healthcare workers. So, under this, I think it's always had this, even under Labour. This is specific about the pay rises. This is something I actually want to talk about. So, Nikki, a nurse who was rung into LBC in tears for her 1% equates to less than $350 a week. So this is about the pay rises here, and you've got this dude here, Callum Bell, where his pay increase puts about £6 in his pocket each week, which doesn't even cover his parking. So for some reason in this country, we expect NHS workers to pay for parking as well. So that's great. So it's not, like I said, it's a flawed system here. So if we actually look at this person's student loan fee, it's about $83,498. So her student loan is actually higher than mine, which is crazy. And she has to pay, 5.6 interest rate. So you've got about $3,000 of interest added. It gets written off after like 30 years. But if you're an NHS worker, you've still got to pay student loans, and it's just such a stupid way to run things. Again, why would you want to, work, become a nurse when this is the amount of debt you're going to accrue from the government? It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous, to be honest, and that's the last point I want to talk about. I guess they could do a system where you can do student loans or whatever, but you say you work 5 years in the NHS or whatever, and that debt is written off. You don't pay any of it back. If you choose to stay in and work for the NHS, but at the same time, that kind of it's a bit dodgy, but it has to be matched with a decent salary in order for people to take that option. We can see here that the government have decided to, not give them a proper pay rise. That's just the way it is. And the way I see the NHS is, it was a gift from those guys, people like Niall Bevan. So long as, him and Clement Attlee, even Maynard Keynes to an extent, these people are the ones who helped to create the NHS, and the NHS will last as long as there are folk with the faith to fight for it. As Niall Bevan, the founder of the NHS, and that faith is gone. People have elected multiple Conservative governments, and they've decimated the NHS through budget cuts, destroying staff morale, getting into constant fights with junior doctors, etc. We looked at this number here. As they've had a real terms pay cut since 2010. Band 5 nurses, and the way I see the NHS, it's like this. This clip is from My Hero when they talk about the power, All Might's power and stuff like that. This is the way I see the NHS. Really, this is the way I see kind of the NHS. It was that generation, defeated the Nazis and then voted in a Labour government who gave us the NHS. Like what? There were problems within that generation for multiple reasons, but that's insane what they gave to us. That just those two things right there are things that I don't think any generation in the future could surpass that. But if we actually watch this clip here, this is how I feel about the NHS.
その力を次へと託してきたんだよ。みんなのためになりますようにと、一つの希望となりますようにと。次はお前の番だ。頑張ろうな。年寄り。
It was given to us. That's why I think people don't value it. People, Gen Xers, people like that. They don't remember the system beforehand because they never lived it. They never lived paying, paying for, to see the GP because they, that's how it was before. If you were working, you wouldn't have to pay. But if you were married to someone, if who wasn't working, or for your children, they had to pay to see the GP. I think people have forgotten. In the words of Roy Jones Jr., y'all must have forgot what it was like before that, because if we keep going down this road, that's the system we'll end up with. Because of the way the government have run things. It's not a hard one to figure out. There are pros and cons of this system, no doubt. There are issues with the system. But a lot of it is down to just a massive lack of underfunding. The NHS is always going to have efficiency problems when it's such a big operation and it's run by absolute morons within places like NHS England. Also, the fact that they've managed to pay consultants, £1,000 a day to work for the failing test and trace system. So the money is there. Obviously, this money you would need a lot more to give staff within the NHS pay rises. But they've spaffed money left, right, and centre during this pandemic, and now they're telling people they ain't got money for the people who gave up the most, arguably, to keep the country going. NHS workers, people that worked in the care sector, people who are key workers, they gave up so much, and the government refuses to reward them for keeping this country going. All we could do is clap them. That's all they did. Create little badges and all that stuff. But the main problem the NHS has is, one, its own success when it comes to people who have aged. If we look at the age expectancy in the UK, it's gone up. Well, obviously, for most countries it has, because of the marvels of modern medicine and, hopefully people doing better diets, but obviously obesity has gone up. But one of the another problem the NHS has is its own success, that as people live longer, they need more help, they need more care, and that puts a further strain on the NHS, an ageing population. But at the same time, the lack of funding is the main problem the NHS has. And, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. But at the same time, people haven't realised that yet. But, this video has gone for such a long time. I wonder how it's gone on for. Must be like an hour or something. It's almost an hour. So, this was a video requested by my boy, the Master Mixer Elazid. If you have any other requests, just chuck them in the Discord or the comments. I'll leave all the links in below for the description. Let me know what you thought about the video. If you made it this far to the end, thank you so much for putting on my rambling, because I lost it halfway through that video. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. And I hope everything made sense.